In the mountains of Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina, there exist communities that have lived under a generational financial code that the modern banking system has never touched. Appalachian families, isolated by geography and forged by hard experience, developed monetary rules so practical that many went more than a century without participating in formal banking institutions. They did not ignore money. They understood it with a clarity that most modern Americans buried in debt have lost. While the average household debt in the U.S. today exceeds $90,000, these families had no debt. They owned their land, built their homes, and passed wealth to their children through systems foreign to current institutions. These are the 10 secret money rules that Appalachian families used for 150 years to never need a bank. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. Let's get started. Rule number 1, own the land or own nothing. The fundamental principle of Appalachian culture was land ownership, treated as the non-negotiable foundation of family survival and independence. Landowning families could not be evicted or controlled by landlords or banks. Land was bought slowly, paid for in full, and never mortgaged. The rule was absolute. If you couldn't buy it with cash, you didn't buy it. Debt on land was considered financial suicide as it gave a third-party rights over the family's livelihood. The modern practice of financing homes for 30 years with compound interest would have been unthinkable to an elder of the mountain. Own the soil you stand on, or you will own nothing. Rule number 2, the community lending circle. When these families needed capital and didn't have the total savings, they turned to their community, not the bank. They operated informal lending circles where a trusted group contributed a fixed monthly sum, and each month one member received the total collected. No interest, no credit checks, and no bank profits. These systems served the same function as modern personal loans, but without extracting wealth from borrowers. The trust necessary for these systems to function was, in itself, a form of community wealth, and maintaining it was a responsibility of the utmost seriousness. Rule number 3, skills are your savings account. In these communities, a person's skills were their most valuable asset, more reliable than cash and impossible to destroy by an economic collapse. Every young person was expected to master essential tasks such as carpentry, food preservation, and farming. Each mastered skill reduced dependence on purchased goods and increased family resilience. A person who could repair their home and produce their own food had a standard of living equivalent to someone with much higher income who had to pay for everything. In an economy where you pay for tasks that were once done at home, the principle of skills as savings is transformative. Rule number 4, never borrow what you can barter. Appalachian communities operated extensive barter economies. Before seeking cash or credit, they exhausted every avenue of exchange. Barter was not a primitive substitute, but a sophisticated parallel system that created bonds of mutual trust. By trading through reciprocal exchanges, they built social capital that acted as insurance in difficult times. The mountain rule was direct. Before spending money, ask if someone in your community has what you need and wants what you have. Rule number 5, the harvest and store system. Families understood that the cost of food was not fixed. They bought or harvested during high season, when supplies were abundant and cheap, preserving enough for the months of scarcity. Pantries and cellars were not picturesque traditions, but financial infrastructure that allowed for year-round consumption at a fraction of the monthly cost. A well-stocked pantry represented months of income in food value. Families that maintained this system were insulated from price hikes, a principle that today applies by buying in bulk and processing seasonal products. Rule number 6, cash money is for taxes and luxuries only. Traditional Appalachian mountain families had a clearly defined philosophy about cash money that is almost incomprehensible from the perspective of modern consumer culture. Cash was not the primary medium of exchange for everyday life. It was reserved for 2 specific categories of transaction: obligations to outside authorities, primarily property taxes, which required cash payment and could not be bartered, and genuine luxuries that could not be produced locally, such as coffee, sugar, salt, and manufactured cloth before home textile production declined. Everything else, food, labor, services, building materials, tools, was obtained through production, barter, or community exchange. According to economic historians specializing in Appalachian studies, including Dr. Ron Eller at the University of Kentucky, whose research on Appalachian economic history spans decades, This limited engagement with the cash economy was a deliberate and effective financial strategy that kept mountain families out of the debt cycles that devastated cash-dependent communities during economic downturns. When the cash economy collapsed in 1929, communities that had always operated primarily outside it were far less affected than those fully integrated into it. The principle translates directly. Every dollar of cash expenditure you can eliminate through production, barter, or community exchange is a dollar of income you no longer need to earn, a tax you no longer need to pay, and a point of vulnerability to economic disruption you no longer carry. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. Rule number 7, the multi-generation household economy. Appalachian families did not separate into nuclear household units at the earliest opportunity the way modern American culture encourages. Multiple generations lived together or in close proximity as a deliberate economic strategy, and the financial advantages of this arrangement were understood and valued by every member of the family. Grandparents provided childcare, freeing parents to work and generate income. Adult children provided labor, housing maintenance, and eventually care for aging parents. Extended family networks shared tools, equipment, draft animals, and specialized knowledge without duplication of expenditure. According to sociological research on Appalachian family structures published in academic journals through the 20th century, the multi-generational household was the dominant residential arrangement in mountain communities not because of poverty or lack of alternatives, but because it was financially superior to the isolated nuclear household that American culture began promoting aggressively after World War II. The post-war housing boom deliberately incentivized the nuclear household model because it required every household to purchase its own set of appliances, its own car, its own tools, generating enormous consumer spending that drove economic growth. From the perspective of individual family wealth, however, the multi-generational model that Appalachian communities maintained was far more efficient. Economists at MIT who have studied multi-generational household economics estimate that households with multiple adult generations spend 30 to 40% less per capita on housing, childcare, and basic living expenses than equivalent nuclear households. Rule number 8. Make it last, fix it first, replace it never. Appalachian mountain culture had an absolute and non-negotiable relationship with physical objects. Everything was maintained, repaired, and used until it was genuinely beyond recovery. The idea of replacing a functional item with a newer version simply because a newer version existed, which is the engine of modern consumer culture, was not merely foreign to mountain communities. It was considered a character flaw, indicating poor judgment and disrespect for the labor that went into making the object in the first place. Tools were sharpened, handles replaced, moving parts lubricated and adjusted. Clothing was mended, altered, patched, and repurposed through multiple life cycles. Furniture was repaired and refinished. Buildings were maintained continuously with small investments of labor to prevent the large costs of major structural failures. According to material culture scholars who have studied Appalachian craft and repair traditions, including research housed at the Smithsonian Center for Folklife and Cultural Heritage, mountain communities maintained objects for generations that modern consumers would discard within a decade. The financial implications of this approach are staggering when calculated in modern terms. The average American household replaces its refrigerator every 10 to 15 years, its washing machine every 10 years, and its car every 8 years, according to industry statistics. Regular maintenance extends the functional life of all of these items significantly, with maintenance costs that are a small fraction of replacement costs. The mountain rule is financially superior: maintain everything, repair what breaks, and replace only what is genuinely irreparable. Rule number 9, every person in the family earns. In Appalachian mountain households, the concept of a single breadwinner supporting a household of dependents was largely absent. Every member of the household, from the oldest to the youngest capable of productive work, contributed to the household economy in ways that had measurable economic value. Children gathered eggs, fed animals, tended gardens, collected firewood, and performed dozens of tasks that freed adult time for more complex and higher-value work. Elderly family members preserved food, cared for younger children, maintained tools and equipment, and contributed accumulated knowledge and skills that had direct economic value. Women managed the household economy with a level of sophistication that the broader culture consistently undervalued, but that was absolutely central to family financial health. According to historical economists studying the Appalachian region, the household was understood as a productive economic unit in which every person's contribution mattered and was recognized, not as a consumption unit supported by one or two income earners. This understanding produced families in which economic responsibility was distributed, skills were developed early, and no single person's inability to work due to illness, injury, or death created a financial catastrophe from which the family could not recover. The modern equivalent is building households in which every capable adult contributes economically. Children learn practical skills and financial literacy early, and economic vulnerability is reduced through distribution rather than concentration. Rule number 10, your word is your credit score. In a community without banks and without credit reporting agencies, reputation was the only credit score that mattered, and Appalachian Mountain families understood this with complete clarity. A family's word, their record of fulfilling obligations, repaying debts, completing work they had committed to, and standing behind their transactions, was the asset that determined their access to community capital, labor exchange, and the trust networks that made the entire alternative economy function. Families that defaulted on obligations, that failed to complete agreed-upon work, or that misrepresented their goods in trade transactions were effectively cut off from the community economic system, a consequence far more serious and immediate than a damaged credit score in the modern sense. According to oral history research conducted across the Appalachian region by institutions including the Foxfire Fund in Georgia, which has documented traditional Appalachian culture since 1966, the moral weight placed on keeping one's word in economic transactions was consistently described by community members as one of the defining values of mountain culture. It was not merely an ethical principle, but a practical financial necessity. Your reputation was the infrastructure on which all community economic exchange rested. Protecting it required absolute honesty and complete follow-through on every commitment. In a world where trust in institutions, in banks, in financial systems is at historic lows, the Appalachian principle that personal integrity is your most valuable financial asset has never been more relevant or more true. The financial system that Appalachian Mountain families built and sustained for more than a century and a half was not built on luck or on simple conditions. These communities faced poverty, exploitation by outside coal and timber interests, geographic isolation, limited access to education and medical care, and systematic economic marginalization. They survived and maintained their independence through the application of financial principles that are universal in their logic and timeless in their application. Own rather than rent, build skills rather than buy services, exchange with neighbors rather than transact with institutions, store rather than shop continuously, maintain everything you own, distribute economic contribution across every family member. Protect your reputation as your most valuable asset. These principles did not require a bank account, a credit card, or a financial advisor. They required community, discipline, skills, and the understanding that true financial security is built from the inside out, not borrowed from the outside in. The Appalachian families who lived by these rules for 150 years were not poor in any way that mattered. They were free. Leave a like, subscribe, and share. See you next time.